The morning sunlight streams through Elena Rivera's kitchen window, casting golden patterns across the small table where she sits with her coffee growing cold. It's Mother's Day, and the house feels impossibly quiet. At 52, Elena has weathered many storms as a single mother, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Her hands shake slightly as she stares at her phone screen, reading the message that makes her heart stop. Your number has been blocked by this contact. The contact name still shows Marcus, my heart, with a photo of her 28-year-old son from his wedding day, smiling broadly in his navy suit. She tries calling again, desperate to hear his voice, but the automated message confirms her worst fear. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from your number. The phone slips from her fingers, clattering onto the wooden table. Elena's voice breaks the silence, barely above a whisper at first, then growing stronger with raw emotion. I raised him for 28 years. 28 years of scraped knees I kissed better, of working double shifts so he could have everything he needed. I held him when he cried over his first heartbreak, celebrated every achievement, sacrificed my own dreams so he could chase his. She picks up a Mother's Day card she'd bought for herself as a joke the day before, one of those funny ones that says, "World's okayest mom." Now it feels like a cruel mockery. Her fingers trace the edges as tears begin to fall. I remember the day he was born, how tiny his fingers were when they wrapped around mine. I promised him I'd always be there, that nothing would ever come between us. I kept that promise through his father walking out, through my own loneliness, through every challenge life threw at us. Elena's voice grows steadier, but the pain is unmistakable. 3 months ago, he hugged me goodbye after Sunday dinner and told me he loved me. Today, on Mother's Day morning, I discovered I no longer exist in his world. My own son, the little boy who used to make me construction paper cards and bring me dandelions, has erased me from his life like I was never there at all. The kitchen clock ticks loudly in the silence, marking time in a world where Elena Rivera has suddenly become invisible to the person she loves most. She looks at the empty chair across from her where Marcus used to sit every Sunday morning, telling her about his week, his dreams, his plans. Now that chair might as well be in another universe. They say a mother's love is unconditional, but what happens when that love is returned with complete rejection? What happens when the child you die for decides you're not worth living for? Elena's reflection in the black phone screen shows a woman who looks older than her years, worn down by confusion and heartbreak. She doesn't know it yet, but this moment, this devastating Mother's Day morning, is about to become the turning point that will either destroy her or transform her into someone she never knew she could be. The coffee cup sits untouched, growing cold like the relationship that once warmed her heart. Outside, neighbors are probably receiving flowers, cards, and phone calls from their children. Inside Elena's kitchen, the only sound is the gentle sobbing of a mother who has lost her child, not to death, but to something far more painful, deliberate abandonment. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Just 6 months earlier, Elena's life had felt like a beautiful testament to the power of a mother's love. She would wake up every morning in her cozy 2-bedroom apartment, the walls lined with photos chronicling Marcus' journey from gap-toothed kindergartner to successful marketing executive. The centerpiece of her living room was his college graduation photo, where he held his diploma with one arm and wrapped the other around her shoulders, both of them beaming with pride. "I did it, Mom," he had whispered in her ear that day. "We did it together." Those words had made every sacrifice worthwhile. Elena remembered the early years after the divorce when Marcus was just 13 and trying to understand why his father had chosen his secretary over his family. She'd worked double shifts at the hospital, her feet aching and her body exhausted, but she never let Marcus see her struggle. Instead, she'd come home to help with homework, pack his lunch with little encouraging notes, and listen to him practice his presentations for speech class. When Marcus got accepted to State University, Elena had cried tears of joy in the financial aid office. She'd quietly taken out a second mortgage on her small house to cover what the scholarships didn't, never telling him about the sleepless nights she spent calculating and recalculating their budget. She wanted him to focus on his studies, not worry about money. The Sunday dinners had become their sacred tradition. Every week, Elena would spend Saturday preparing Marcus' favorite meal, her grandmother's recipe for chicken enchiladas, homemade salsa, and tres leches cake. Marcus would arrive around 2 o'clock, often bringing friends from college and later girlfriends. Elena's dining room table became a gathering place where laughter echoed off the walls and stories were shared over steaming plates of food. "Your mom is incredible," she'd overheard Marcus telling his girlfriend Sarah during his senior year. "She's like a superhero disguised as a nurse. I don't know how she does it all." When Marcus started dating Sophia 2 years ago, Elena had embraced her immediately. She remembered their first meeting at a coffee shop downtown, how nervous Sophia seemed, fidgeting with her engagement ring and apologizing for being late. Elena had reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," she'd said warmly. "Marcus is lucky to have found someone who makes him light up the way you do." Sophia had smiled then, seeming genuinely touched. "He talks about you constantly." "I was so nervous." "You must meet the woman who raised such an amazing man." Elena had helped plan their engagement party, contributed $3,000 toward their wedding without being asked, and spent weeks hand-sewing pearls onto Sophia's veil as a surprise gift. She'd given a tearful speech at the reception about watching Marcus grow from a scared little boy into a man who knew how to love deeply. "I'm not losing a son," she'd said, raising her champagne glass. "I'm gaining a daughter." The newlyweds had thanked her repeatedly that night, with Marcus hugging her tight and whispering, "I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything you've done for us." That was 8 months ago. Now, Elena sits in the same kitchen where she'd planned their wedding shower, wondering when everything began to fall apart. The shift began so subtly that Elena almost missed it entirely. It was a crisp October evening, 6 months after Marcus and Sophia's wedding, and the three of them were gathered around Elena's dining room table for their usual Sunday dinner. The autumn light filtered through her lace curtains, casting warm shadows across the enchilada casserole she'd spent all afternoon perfecting. Marcus was telling them about a promotion opportunity at his marketing firm when Elena's face lit up with a memory. "Oh, that reminds me of when you were 8 and decided you wanted to start your own business selling lemonade," she said, her eyes twinkling with maternal pride. "You made these elaborate signs with colored markers and convinced half the neighborhood kids to work for you. You were such a little entrepreneur even then." She turned to Sophia with a warm smile. He had this whole system worked out, different flavors for different prices, and he even made a customer loyalty card program. "I still have the business plan he wrote in his little notebook." But instead of the appreciative smile Elena expected, Sophia's expression shifted to something harder, more dismissive. She let out a sharp laugh that cut through the comfortable atmosphere like a blade. "Oh, Elena, you're being dramatic again. Marcus barely remembers half of those childhood things you bring up." The words hit Elena like a physical slap. She'd been called many things in her life: stubborn, protective, even overwhelming at times, but never dramatic, and certainly not about her own son's childhood, which she'd lived through every precious moment of. Marcus, who had been nodding along with Elena's story just seconds before, suddenly looked uncomfortable. He stared down at his plate, pushing rice around with his fork, and said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Elena felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I maybe do get carried away with the memories sometimes," she said quietly, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. "It's just that those moments meant so much to me." Sophia's smile was tight and condescending. "Of course they did. It's just that Marcus is focused on his future now, not dwelling on the past." She reached over and squeezed Marcus's hand possessively. "Isn't that right, honey?" Marcus finally looked up, nodded at his mother, and his eyes met Sophia's as he nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm trying to stay focused on what's ahead. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't just about childhood stories. There was something deeper happening here, something that made her feel like an outsider in her own dining room. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Elena found herself questioning every word before she spoke it, second-guessing memories that had once felt sacred and sure. As they prepared to leave that evening, Marcus hugged her goodbye, but it felt different somehow, shorter, less warm. Sophia kissed her cheek politely, but Elena caught the way her future daughter-in-law's eyes remained calculating and cold. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," Marcus said, but Elena noticed he didn't meet her eyes. That night, Elena lay in bed replaying the interaction, trying to convince herself she was overreacting, but the dismissive tone in Sophia's voice echoed in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. Something that might never shift back. What followed was a slow, methodical dismantling of everything Elena had built with her son. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was far more insidious than that. It was death by 1,000 small cuts, each one barely noticeable on its own, but collectively bleeding her dry of hope and connection. The phone calls were the first casualty. For 28 years, Elena and Marcus had talked almost daily, quick check-ins about work, weather, weekend plans, or just the comfortable chatter between two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Now, when Elena called, Marcus would answer with a distracted, "Hey Mom, what's up?" as if her call was an interruption rather than a highlight of his day. "Just wanted to hear your voice," she'd say, and he'd respond with, "Okay, well, I'm kind of busy right now. Can I call you back later?" The callbacks rarely came. Their Sunday dinners became negotiations. "We'll see" became Marcus's standard response to her invitations. Sophia has been really stressed with work, and she might want a quiet weekend. When they did come, they arrived later than planned and left earlier than usual. Sophia would spend most of the meal checking her phone, contributing minimal conversation while wearing an expression of polite endurance. Elena found herself walking on eggshells in her own home. She stopped telling the stories that had once delighted Marcus, afraid of another dismissive comment from Sophia. She censored herself, weighing every word, every gesture, wondering if her natural warmth was somehow too much, too overwhelming, too dramatic. The holidays became particularly painful. Elena had always hosted Thanksgiving and Christmas, traditions stretching back to Marcus's childhood. This year, when she mentioned planning the menu in early November, Sophia spoke up first. "My parents really want us to start our own traditions as a married couple," she said sweetly, though her eyes held no warmth. "We're thinking of doing a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us." Elena felt the familiar sting of exclusion, but forced an understanding smile. "Of course, that makes perfect sense. You're building your own family now." Marcus didn't argue or suggest including his mother. He simply nodded, avoiding her gaze. The gifts she'd always loved giving became sources of anxiety. When she brought Marcus his favorite homemade cookies at his office, his coworkers gushed over them as they always had, but Marcus seemed embarrassed rather than proud. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly, quickly tucking the container into his desk drawer as if it were something shameful. Elena began to feel like she was disappearing in real time. Her opinions were dismissed, her presence merely tolerated, her love treated like an inconvenience. She started declining invitations from friends, too exhausted by the constant rejection to maintain her other relationships. She found herself making excuses for Marcus' behavior to concerned family members. "He's just busy with married life," she'd say, forcing brightness into her voice. "It's normal for adult children to pull away a bit." But deep down, Elena knew this wasn't normal. This wasn't healthy separation. This was systematic erasure. She was being methodically edited out of her own son's life, one interaction at a time, until she'd become nothing more than an obligation he increasingly resented fulfilling. The moment that would forever divide Elena's life into before and after arrived on a mild Saturday evening in March during Marcus' 28th birthday celebration. Elena had spent weeks planning what to give her son, something meaningful that would show how proud she was of the man he'd become despite the growing distance between them. She'd chosen a beautiful silver watch engraved with the words, "To my son, my pride and joy. Love always, Mom." It wasn't expensive by some standards, but it represented 3 weeks of overtime shifts at the hospital. More importantly, it carried the weight of 28 years of unconditional love. The party was held at Marcus and Sophia's house, a modern 2-story home that Elena's down payment contribution had helped make possible. The living room buzzed with Marcus' college friends, work colleagues, and Sophia's family. Elena had arrived on time, dressed carefully in her navy blue dress, and carrying the elegantly wrapped gift box. She waited patiently for the right moment, watching Marcus laugh with his friends, remembering all the birthday parties she'd thrown for him as a child, the superhero themes, the backyard barbecues, the surprise parties where she'd coordinated with all his friends' parents. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. When Marcus began opening gifts, Elena approached with her carefully chosen present. Her heart raced with nervous excitement as she handed him the box. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said softly, hoping the watch would somehow bridge the gap that had grown between them. Marcus unwrapped it slowly, and for just a moment, Elena saw something like appreciation flicker across his face as he read the engraving. But before he could respond, Sophia appeared at his shoulder, taking the watch from his hands to examine it more closely. The room seemed to hold its breath as Sophia turned the watch over, reading the inscription with an expression that shifted from curiosity to something much colder. Then, in front of everyone, Marcus' friends, colleagues, Sophia's parents, neighbors, she let out that same sharp laugh Elena had come to dread. "How sweet, Elena," Sophia said, her voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Very sentimental." She paused, holding the watch up slightly as if it were a curious artifact. "Though I have to say, the engraving is a bit much, don't you think?" Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone's drink glass clinked against a table in the sudden silence. Her face burned with shame as she realized she'd become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. But the worst part wasn't Sophia's public mockery, it was Marcus' response. Instead of defending his mother or appreciating the gift, he looked genuinely embarrassed. He cleared his throat and said, his voice carrying across the quiet room, "Mom, maybe next time you should ask what I actually need instead of just assuming." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She felt her knees go weak as 28 years of gift-giving, every Christmas morning, every birthday celebration, every just because present she'd given out of pure love, were reduced to assumptions and mistakes in front of a room full of strangers. Elena managed to whisper, "Of course, I'm sorry," before excusing herself to the bathroom, where she locked the door and cried silently into her trembling hands. The weeks following Marcus' birthday party stretched like an endless winter. Elena found herself replaying that humiliating moment over and over, each memory making her chest tighten with fresh shame. She'd barely slept, barely eaten, and had called in sick to work twice, something she'd never done in 15 years of nursing. The watch incident had changed something fundamental inside her. For the first time since Marcus' birth, Elena began to question whether her love was wanted, whether her presence brought joy or burden. The doubt ate at her like acid, corroding decades of certainty about her role as his mother. After 3 weeks of torturous silence, Elena made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. She would try one more time, just once, to reconnect with her son. She would be humble, she would apologize if necessary, and she would find a way back to his heart. Her hands shook as she dialed his number on a quiet Tuesday morning. Marcus answered on the fourth ring, his voice flat and distracted. "Hi, Mom." "Marcus." "Sweetheart," Elena began, her voice careful and soft. "I was wondering if maybe we could have lunch this week, just the two of us. I feel like we haven't really talked in so long, and I miss you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Elena wondered if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his words were like ice water in her veins. "Mom, I've been talking to Sophia about this, and honestly, she thinks you're having trouble accepting that I'm married now. You're still trying to be the most important woman in my life, and that's not healthy." Elena gripped the phone tighter, feeling the world tilt beneath her feet. "Marcus, I just want to have lunch with my son. I want to know how you're doing. What's happening in your life that's not about Sophia?" "But it is, Mom," Marcus interrupted, his voice growing firmer, more distant. "Everything with you is about trying to get me back to the way things used to be. Sophia says it's a common thing with single mothers who made their kids their whole world. You need to work on accepting that I have a wife now, that she comes first." The clinical way he spoke, as if diagnosing a mental illness, cut deeper than any scream or angry outburst could have. Elena realized she was listening to words that weren't entirely his own, phrases that had been planted, watered, and cultivated by someone else. "I understand," Elena whispered, though she understood nothing except that she was losing a battle she didn't even know she was fighting. "Do you?" Marcus asked, and there was something almost hopeful in his voice, as if he wanted her to prove him wrong. But Elena was too broken, too tired to fight anymore. "Yes," she said simply, "I understand." "Good. Maybe once you work on that, we can have a normal relationship." Elena hung up without saying goodbye. She sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the silence that had become her constant companion, and made a promise to herself. She wouldn't call again, she wouldn't visit, wouldn't reach out, wouldn't make any more assumptions about being wanted. For the first time in 28 years, Elena Rivera stopped being Marcus' mother by choice rather than by circumstance. The difference felt like dying while still breathing. The silence that followed Elena's last conversation with Marcus became a living thing that wrapped itself around her life like a suffocating blanket. Days blurred into weeks, and Elena found herself existing rather than living, moving through the motions of her routine while feeling increasingly detached from the world around her. Her small apartment, once filled with the warmth of family photos and memories, now felt like a mausoleum. She avoided looking at the pictures lining her hallway: Marcus's first day of school, his high school graduation, their last Christmas together when everything still felt normal. Each image was a reminder of a relationship that seemed to have been built on quicksand, dissolving beneath her feet without warning. Elena's reflection in the bathroom mirror each morning showed a woman she barely recognized. Her face had grown gaunt, her eyes hollow with sleepless nights spent wondering what she'd done wrong. She'd lost 15 pounds without trying, her nursing scrubs hanging loose on her shrinking frame. Colleagues at the hospital began asking if she was feeling all right, their concerned voices seeming to come from very far away. The worst moments came in the evening when she'd return home from her shifts and face the crushing weight of her empty apartment. She developed a ritual of checking her phone obsessively, hoping for a text, a missed call, any sign that Marcus remembered she existed. The screen remained stubbornly blank, showing only her own reflection, staring back with desperate eyes. Elena stopped going to her book club, declined invitations from friends, and avoided the grocery store on Sundays when she might run into people who would ask about Marcus. She couldn't bear to explain why her successful, loving son had simply vanished from her life. The shame felt too enormous to put into words. One particularly dark evening in late April, Elena found herself sitting on the floor of what used to be Marcus' bedroom, now converted into a storage room. Boxes of his childhood belongings surrounded her like archaeological evidence of a life that had mattered. She pulled out his elementary school art projects, report cards covered in gold stars, thank you cards he'd made for Mother's Day with construction paper and crayons. Dear Mom, read one card from when he was 7, written in his careful, crooked handwriting. You are the best mom in the whole world. I love you more than video games and ice cream. Thank you for taking care of me when I'm sick and for making the best pancakes. Love, Marcus. Elena held the card against her chest and sobbed until she had no tears left. How would that little boy, who loved her more than video games and ice cream, become a man who couldn't spare an hour for lunch with his mother? The physical pain of loss settled into her bones like arthritis. She'd wake up each morning with an ache in her chest that no amount of ibuprofen could touch. Food tasted like cardboard, conversations felt exhausting, and even her patients at the hospital seemed to sense her emotional absence. Elena had become a ghost in her own life, haunting the spaces where her identity as Marcus' mother used to live. She existed in a gray limbo between the woman she'd been and whoever she was supposed to become now that her defining relationship had been severed without explanation or hope of reconciliation. 3 months into the suffocating silence, Elena's phone rang on a humid Tuesday evening in late June. She almost didn't answer. Most calls these days were from telemarketers or concerned friends she wasn't ready to face. But when she saw Lily London on the screen, her heart leaped. Her daughter's voice calling from across the ocean felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "Mom, how are you holding up?" Lily asked. S' voice carried the warmth that had been missing from Elena's life for so long. At 24, Lily had inherited her mother's compassionate heart and her father's sharp intelligence. She worked as a graphic designer in London, building the independent life Elena had always encouraged her children to pursue. "I'm managing, sweetheart," Elena said, trying to inject some energy into her voice. "How's the new job treating you?" "Mom, stop." Lily's voice was gentle but firm. "I can hear it in your voice. You sound awful, and I think I know why." Elena's stomach clenched. She'd worked so hard to keep her pain private, not wanting to burden Lily with the family drama while she was trying to build her career abroad. "I just got off the phone with Marcus," Lily continued, her voice taking on an edge Elena had never heard before. "Mom, did you know he's been telling people you've been harassing him and Sophia? He's saying you can't accept boundaries and that you're becoming unstable." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white. "What?" "Lily, I haven't contacted Marcus in 3 months. Not once. After our last conversation, I promised myself I wouldn't reach out until he was ready." "That's what I thought," Lily said, her voice growing angrier because the Marcus I'm talking to is painting a completely different picture. He's telling people you've been showing up at their house unannounced, calling at all hours, leaving emotional voicemails. He said Sophia is afraid of you. Elena felt the room spin around her. "Lily, I swear to you none of that is true. I've respected their space completely. I've been dying inside from the silence, but I haven't contacted them at all. I believe you, Mom, because I know you, and I know Marcus, or at least I thought I did." Lily's voice cracked slightly. "He's been telling extended family that you're having some kind of mental breakdown. Aunt Sarah called me last week, worried sick about you, saying Marcus told her you were becoming paranoid and delusional about his marriage." Elena sank into her kitchen chair, the phone pressed against her ear as her world crumbled further. "He's lying about me, Lily." "But why? Why would he do this?" "I don't know, Mom, but it gets worse. He told me that you've been threatening Sophia, saying inappropriate things about their relationship. He even said you tried to turn him against his wife by making up stories about her being manipulative." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Elena. Marcus was accusing her of the exact behavior that was being perpetrated against her. Someone had been systematically poisoning her son's mind, and now that same person was using Marcus to poison everyone else's perception of her. "Lily, I need you to know that none of this is true. I loved Sophia like my own daughter. I would never." "I know, Mom," Lily interrupted softly. "I know, and I think it's time we figured out what's really going on here." The phone call with Lily became a turning point that Elena would later recognize as the moment she stopped drowning and started swimming toward shore. After hanging up, she sat in her kitchen as the evening light faded, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: clarity. For the first time since this nightmare began, Elena stopped asking herself what she had done wrong and started asking what was being done to her. The shift in perspective was like putting on glasses. After months of stumbling through a blurry world, suddenly patterns emerged from what had seemed like random cruelty. Elena walked to her bedroom closet and pulled out a storage box she'd tucked away years ago. Inside were letters, cards, and printed emails, a treasure trove of correspondence between her and Marcus spanning over a decade. Her hands trembled as she opened the first letter, dated from his freshman year of college. "Dear Mom," it began in Marcus's familiar handwriting. "I know I don't say this enough, but you are my hero. When Dad left, you could have fallen apart, but instead, you became stronger than ever. You worked yourself to the bone to give me opportunities, and you never once made me feel guilty about the sacrifices you were making. Every success I have is because you believed in me first. I hope someday I can be half the parent to my children that you've been to me. Love always, your grateful son, Marcus." Elena pressed the letter to her chest, feeling validation flow through her like medicine. This wasn't the voice of a son with an overbearing, unstable mother. This was the voice of a young man who understood exactly how loved and supported he was. She continued reading, finding email after email where Marcus thanked her for care packages, praised her advice, and expressed genuine affection. There were photos he'd sent from college parties with captions like, "Wish you were here, Mom. Everyone wants to meet the woman who raised such an awesome guy." And texts from his early 20s saying things like, "Had a rough day at work, but then I remembered what you always told me about perseverance. You're the wisest person I know." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Elena had not been a difficult, intrusive mother. She had been devoted, supportive, and deeply loved in return. The narrative that was now being constructed about their relationship was not just false, it was a complete inversion of reality. Elena began making a timeline, placing the changes in Marcus's behavior against significant events in his relationship with Sophia. The pattern was stark. Every major shift toward coldness coincided with deeper integration into Sophia's family orbit. The engagement party where Sophia's mother had monopolized Marcus's attention. The wedding planning where Elena's suggestions were increasingly dismissed as not matching their vision. The holiday invitations that stopped coming after Sophia mentioned wanting to create new traditions. As Elena organized the evidence, she realized she wasn't losing her mind. She was uncovering a systematic campaign to rewrite history. Someone had convinced Marcus that his loving childhood was actually a prison, that his devoted mother was actually a threat, and that his grateful appreciation was actually obligation born from manipulation. For the first time in months, Elena felt something that had almost been extinguished: righteous anger. Not the bitter rage of a victim, but the clear-eyed fury of someone who finally understood she was being lied about and that those lies were destroying not just her relationship with Marcus, but her reputation among everyone she cared about. The fire that had always burned in Elena's heart, the same fire that had driven her to work double shifts, to sacrifice her own needs, to fight for her children's futures, began to flicker back to life. Elena's awakening didn't lead to rash phone calls or desperate confrontations. Instead, it sparked something far more dangerous to those who had wronged her: methodical, strategic preparation. For the first time in months, she felt purposeful as she began building her case with the precision of a seasoned nurse gathering evidence for a difficult diagnosis. Her first step was to consult with Margaret Chin, a family attorney recommended by a colleague at the hospital. Margaret's office was located in a sleek downtown building, its windows overlooking the city where Elena had raised her children as a single mother. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now preparing to legally protect herself from one of those children. "What you're describing sounds like a textbook case of parental alienation, Margaret explained during their initial consultation, her voice both professional and compassionate. It's a form of psychological manipulation where one person systematically turns a child against a parent by distorting reality and rewriting history. Elena listened intently as Margaret outlined the legal landscape. While Texas didn't have specific laws against parental alienation between adult children and parents, there were still legal protections against defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The challenge, Margaret continued, is that this type of abuse often happens slowly and leaves psychological rather than physical evidence. But from what you're telling me, you have something many victims don't: documentation of the relationship before the alienation began. Elena began organizing her evidence with the same meticulous attention to detail she applied to patient care. She created a timeline spanning the past 2 years, documenting every interaction, every phone call, every subtle shift in Marcus' behavior. She printed emails, scanned letters, and created a comprehensive folder that told the story of a loving relationship being systematically destroyed. The hardest part was reaching out to family members and friends to verify what lies had been spread about her. Elena called her sister Sarah first, her voice steady despite the humiliation of having to ask what Marcus had told her. "Oh honey," Sarah said sadly, "Marcus called me about 6 weeks ago. He said you'd been having a really hard time accepting his marriage and that you'd been he said you'd been making Sophia uncomfortable with surprise visits and emotional demands." Elena carefully documented each conversation, noting the consistency of the lies and the way they painted her as an unstable woman unable to respect boundaries. The pattern was clear. Someone had crafted a narrative designed to isolate her completely while making Marcus appear to be a concerned son dealing with a difficult mother. Meanwhile, Elena began quietly strengthening her own support network. She returned to her book club, reconnected with friends from work, and started attending her church again. She didn't broadcast her situation, but she stopped hiding from people who cared about her. These relationships would serve as character witnesses if needed, people who could attest to her mental stability and emotional health. Elena also began seeing Dr. Patricia Reeves, a therapist who specialized in family estrangement and emotional abuse. The sessions weren't just for healing. They were creating a professional record of her mental state and the impact of the systematic alienation campaign. "You're not just surviving this," Dr. Reeves told her during one session. "You're building a foundation for whatever comes next. That takes remarkable strength." Elena smiled slightly. For the first time in months, she felt like the woman who had once moved mountains for her children. The difference was that now she was moving mountains for herself. The first crack in Marcus and Sophia's carefully constructed narrative appeared in mid-August, during what should have been a routine family gathering. Elena's cousin Maria was visiting from Phoenix, and she'd reached out directly to Elena to arrange a lunch meeting, bypassing the family communication network that had been systematically poisoned against her. "Elena, I have to ask you something," Maria said over their salads at a quiet downtown restaurant. "Rebecca called me last week with some very concerning information about you. She said Marcus told her you've been struggling with some serious mental health issues." Elena set down her fork, her stomach clenching. Rebecca was Marcus's godmother, a woman who had been present at his baptism and every major milestone since. What exactly did he tell her? Maria's expression was troubled. "He said you've been having paranoid episodes, showing up at his house at odd hours, and that Sophia is genuinely frightened of you." Rebecca was debating whether to stage some kind of intervention. Elena pulled out her phone and showed Maria the call log. "Maria, look at this. The last time I contacted Marcus was April 15th. That's 4 months ago. I haven't been to his house, I haven't called, I haven't texted, nothing." Maria studied the phone, her face shifting from concern to confusion to something approaching anger. But Marcus was so convincing. He had specific examples, dates, incidents. He said, "Called Sophia at work and accused her of stealing your son. That never happened. Elena said quietly. None of it happened. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Elena systematically debunking each lie with evidence from her phone, her calendar, and even her work schedule that proved she was at the hospital during the times Marcus claimed she was harassing them. Maria's expression grew darker as the truth emerged. Elena, this is sick, Maria finally said. Someone has been very deliberately destroying your reputation, and they're using Marcus to do it. Word began to spread through the family network, but now it was Elena's truth rather than Marcus' fiction. Maria called Rebecca immediately after their lunch, sharing what she'd learned. Rebecca, mortified that she'd been duped, reached out to Elena's sister Sarah, who then contacted other family members. Elena's phone began ringing with apologetic relatives who'd been fed a steady diet of lies about her mental state. Each conversation revealed the sophisticated nature of the campaign against her. Marcus hadn't just told random stories. He'd created a consistent, believable narrative complete with fabricated details and emotional manipulation. The most revealing call came from Elena's brother Tom, who lived in Dallas. Marcus called me 3 weeks ago, Tom said, his voice heavy with regret. He was crying. Elena, actually crying. He said he was scared for your safety, that you'd been making threats about what you'd do if he didn't leave Sofia. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The lies had escalated from painting her as pathetic and unstable to potentially dangerous. Someone was systematically escalating the narrative, perhaps preparing the ground for even more serious accusations. But now Elena had something she hadn't possessed before: allies who knew the truth. The isolation that had been her greatest weakness was beginning to crack, and with each conversation, each person who learned they'd been manipulated, Elena's position grew stronger while Marcus and Sofia's carefully constructed house of lies began to tremble. On a crisp Tuesday morning in early September, Elena made the decision that would change everything. She sat across from Margaret Chin in the attorney's conference room, a thick folder of evidence between them, and signed the papers that would force the truth into the light. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Margaret asked, her pen poised over the legal documents. "Once we file these papers, there's no going back. This will escalate the situation significantly." Elena thought of the months of silent suffering, the systematic destruction of her reputation, and the son she'd lost to someone else's manipulation. "I'm certain. They've been lying about me for months, destroying my relationships with people I love. If I don't stop this now, it will only get worse." The cease and desist order was comprehensive and devastating in its precision. It demanded that Marcus Rivera and Sofia Chin Rivera immediately stop making false and defamatory statements about Elena Rivera, including but not limited to claims that she had engaged in harassment, made threats, or displayed unstable mental health. The document outlined specific lies they had spread, complete with dates and witnesses, and demanded written retractions to all family members and friends who had been told these falsehoods. But the real power of the document lay in its detailed appendix, 17 pages of evidence that told the true story of Elena's relationship with her son. Text messages expressing gratitude and love, thank you cards spanning decades, photos from family celebrations where Elena was clearly welcomed and cherished, financial records showing her generous contributions to Marcus' education and wedding, and testimony from family members who could attest to her mental stability and character. The legal papers were served at 10:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, delivered to Marcus and Sofia's front door by a professional process server. Elena wasn't there to see their faces, but she could imagine the shock as they realized their months of careful manipulation had been thoroughly documented and legally challenged. The phone calls started within hours. First came Marcus, his voice shaky and confused. "Mom, what is this?" "Some lawyer just handed us papers that say we're being sued." Elena's voice was calm and steady when she answered, "You're not being sued, Marcus. You're being served with a legal demand to stop lying about me." "Lying? Mom, what are you talking about?" We haven't been, Marcus, Elena interrupted gently but firmly. I know about every false story you've told. I know you told Rebecca I was having paranoid episodes. I know you told Tom I made threats about Sophia. I know you told Sarah I was showing up at your house uninvited. I have a record of every lie, and I have proof that none of it ever happened. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Elena wondered if he'd hung up. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Where did you get all this information from? The family members you lied to, Marcus. They started comparing notes, and your story fell apart. The question isn't how I found out. The question is why you did it in the first place. Elena could hear muffled voices in the background, what sounded like Sophia asking urgent questions. The conversation ended abruptly when Marcus said, "I need to talk to my lawyer," and hung up. For the first time in months, Elena smiled. The truth was finally fighting back. The family court hearing was scheduled for a gray October morning that felt heavy with the weight of impending reckoning. Elena arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, dressed in her navy blue suit, the same one she'd worn to Marcus' college graduation. Margaretchen carried 2 thick briefcases filled with evidence, while Elena clutched a small folder containing the most precious documents, Marcus' childhood letters and cards, the ones that prove. Their relationship had once been built on genuine love and gratitude. At exactly 9 a.m., Marcus and Sophia walked through the courthouse doors with their attorney, a sharp-dressed man who looked supremely confident. Sophia was immaculate, as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression one of carefully controlled concern. Marcus looked pale and uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if searching for an escape route. Elena watched them take their seats across the aisle and felt a strange sense of detachment. These people had systematically destroyed her reputation, manipulated her family, and nearly driven her to a complete breakdown. Yet seeing them now, they looked smaller somehow, diminished by the institutional weight of the legal proceedings. Judge Catherine Mills, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes, called the hearing to order. This is a civil matter involving allegations of defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Miss Rivera, you may present your case. Margaretchen stood and addressed the court with measured precision. Your Honor, what we have here is a textbook case of systematic character assassination. The defendants have spent months spreading false and damaging statements about my client, including claims that she has mental health issues, has engaged in harassment, and poses a threat to their safety. We have documented evidence that not one of these claims is true. Elena watched Marcus and Sophia's attorney lean back confidently in his chair, clearly prepared to paint Elena as an overbearing mother who couldn't accept her son's independence. But his smugness began to fade as Margaret methodically presented the evidence. First came Elena's phone records showing months of silence when Marcus claimed she was calling constantly, then her work schedule proving she was at the hospital during alleged surprise visits, and bank records showing no activity near Marcus' neighborhood when harassment was supposedly occurring. But the moment that changed everything came when Margaret played a recording Elena had forgotten existed, a voicemail Marcus had left just 8 months earlier, before the systematic alienation began. "Hey Mom, it's me. I just wanted to call and tell you how grateful I am for everything you've done for us. Sophia and I were talking last night about how lucky I am to have you as my mother. You raised me to be a good man, and I hope I'm making you proud. I love you so much. Can't wait to see you Sunday for dinner." The courtroom fell silent. Elena saw Marcus's face crumble as he heard his own voice expressing genuine love and appreciation. Sophia's perfectly composed expression cracked for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Judge Mills leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Ria, can you explain how your relationship with your mother deteriorated so dramatically in just 8 months? Because these records suggest that either you've had a complete psychological break or someone has been systematically manipulating your perception of reality." The smiles Marcus and Sophia had worn walking into the courtroom had vanished completely, replaced by the pale recognition that their house of lies was collapsing around them. 2 weeks after the hearing, Elena was tending to her small herb garden on her apartment balcony when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's name, the first time she'd seen it in nearly 6 months. Her hand stilled on the basil leaves as she stared at the screen, her heart racing. Despite the emotional distance she'd worked so hard to create, she let it ring 3 times before answering, her voice steady but guarded. "Hello, Marcus." "Mom." His voice was thick with emotion, barely above a whisper. "Can we talk? I mean really talk." Elena settled into her patio chair, looking out at the city skyline where she'd built a life for herself and her children. "I'm listening." "I don't even know where to start." Marcus's voice cracked, and Elena could hear him struggling to maintain composure. "Mom, I think I've made some terrible, terrible mistakes." After hearing that voicemail. "God, Mom, what did I do to you?" Elena remained silent, letting him find his words. She'd learned the power of silence during these months of forced separation. It created space for truth to emerge. "Sophia and I have been talking, and she helped me realize that maybe I was being influenced by outside pressures." Even now, Marcus couldn't quite bring himself to directly blame his wife. "I think I lost sight of who you really are, of everything you've done for me," Marcus said. Elena said quietly, "Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. For months, you told our family that I was mentally unstable, that I was harassing you, that I was a threat to your marriage. You didn't just hurt me, you tried to destroy my relationships with everyone I care about." "I know," his voice was barely audible. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But Mom, I was so confused. Things got twisted in my head, and I started believing that your love was somehow wrong, unhealthy. I convinced myself that you were trying to control my life instead of just loving me." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "How did things get so twisted, Marcus? Help me understand how the little boy who wrote me thank you cards became a man who could look me in the eye and call me unstable." There was a long pause filled with the sound of Marcus crying softly. "I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. It happened so gradually that I didn't even notice it was happening. One day I was grateful for everything you'd done, and the next day I was seeing all of it as manipulation and control." "Marcus, I love you," Elena said, her own voice finally breaking slightly. "I have loved you every single day of your life, through every challenge, every triumph, every mistake. But I won't pretend that what happened didn't happen. If you want a relationship with, it has to be built on truth, not on the convenience of your guilt." "I understand," Marcus said quickly. "I know I have to earn your trust back. I know it might take years, but Mom, I'm ready to do the work. I'm going to therapy, and I want to understand how I let this happen so it never happens again." Elena looked at her hands, weathered from years of caring for others, and made a decision that would define the rest of their relationship. 6 months later, Elena sat in her small garden behind the townhouse she'd purchased with the settlement money from the defamation case. The February morning was crisp but bright, and she was planting bulbs that would bloom in spring, daffodils and tulips that would push through the cold earth to find the sun. Her hands worked steadily in the soil, no longer shaking with anxiety or grief. The calluses on her palms told a new story now, not just of years spent caring for others, but of months spent rebuilding herself from the ground up. She'd learned to garden, taken painting classes, and even started writing in a journal that Dr. Reeves had recommended. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily, who was visiting from London next month. "Can't wait to see your new place, Mom." Marcus said, "The garden photos you sent are beautiful." Elena smiled at the easy mention of her son. The relationship with Marcus was slowly healing, built now on honesty rather than obligation. They had dinner once a month, conversations that were careful but genuine. He was in therapy, working to understand how he'd been manipulated, and Elena was learning to love him without needing to fix everything for him. Sophia was no longer part of their lives. The divorce had been swift and quiet after the court case when Marcus finally saw the pattern of manipulation that had nearly destroyed his family. Elena felt no satisfaction in the dissolution of their marriage, only relief that the source of poison had been removed from their lives. Another text arrived, this one from her sister Sarah. Book club tonight. Maria is bringing that new thriller everyone's talking about. Elena typed back quickly, wouldn't miss it. She discovered that having her own life, her own interests, and friendships made her a better mother. When Marcus did call or visit, she no longer lived in the shadow of his approval or disapproval. Elena stood and brushed the dirt from her knees, surveying the small plot where new life would soon emerge. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Sometimes things had to die completely before they could grow back stronger and healthier. Her reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman transformed. At 53, Elena looked younger than she had during those dark months of isolation. Her eyes held a clarity that came from understanding her own worth, independent of anyone else's recognition. She'd learned that love didn't require martyrdom, that boundaries weren't betrayal, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's harmful behavior. The woman in the reflection wasn't the same Elena who had sat broken in her kitchen that Mother's Day morning, staring at a blocked number. This Elena had fought for her truth, protected her dignity, and emerged with something more valuable than her son's conditional love, her own unshakable sense of self. She'd lost a son for a while, but she'd found herself, and in finding herself, she'd become the kind of mother who could love without losing herself, support without enabling, and forgive without forgetting. That, Elena realized as she prepared for another ordinary, beautiful day of her reclaimed life, was the most powerful kind of love.